RIVERSTONE Living are redefining later living with a strong focus on well-being, independence and community. Just like in cricket, it's about preparation, balance and longevity, looking after your body, recovering well and staying sharp over the long innings. RIVERSTONE residences support both body and mind, combining beautiful homes with exceptional well-being facilities, from state-of-the-art gyms and swimming pools to spa experiences, cinemas and social spaces. It's a lifestyle designed to help you bat on for the long haul and enjoy every session along the way. Book a tour today at riverstoneliving.com. Hello and welcome to the Wisden Ashes Daily Podcast. A very long day in the dirt for England in Sydney. Australia batted all day, adding another 352 to their total to lead England by 134, still in their first innings with 3 wickets in hand. Travis Head scored his third 100 of the series to cross the elusive 600 run mark for the tour, and Steve Smith scored his 13th Ashes 100, now second on the all-time list behind Don Bradman. I'm Yas and with me today is ESPN Cricinfo's Matt Roller. JP on the Discord says, is this the Cam Ponsonby, the bad one yet? Well, yeah, after England were pumped at Brisbane, Cam did say we haven't had the bad one. I think he was right. This was the bad one, Matt. I think summed up for me by TNT at the end of the day getting Jacob Bethel to talk through his 1 for 50 for the viewers at home. That was tough for England.
Yeah, we've reached the stage of the tour where the assistant coaches have done so much press that they're actually being protected from the media. The England team no longer want to have to put up the assistant coaches who are in the spotlight and the firing line. It almost reminded me when Jacob Bethel strolled into the press conference room of the day during the women's tour here last year when England put up Rhiannon McDonald-Gay after a disastrous day in that test. It felt like a similar sort of situation here. Yeah, I think that might well be the bad one, you know. I think from the moment that Will Jacks shelled that catch, deep square leg or deep mid-wicket, it really felt like it was going to be a long day and proved as such. I think this has been a good advert for not having your best 3 fast bowlers go down injured midway through a series. I think England have looked very, very short in their attack. I don't think Ben Stokes has captained particularly well at all today. But that said, I don't think any captain in Test history would have captained pretty well today, given the quality of England's attack or lack thereof. And yeah, it just felt throughout Australia's innings really that both Travis Head and Steve Smith were just going to get autopilot hundreds. It felt like as soon as the new ball spells had been bowled and Brydon Carter had been short and wide like he has been throughout with the new ball on day 2, this was going to be exactly what happened. And Head 600 run for the series has been pretty unbelievable, really. I think he's probably my player of the series ahead of Stark, despite the fact that Stark is, 28 wickets and a few useful runs in there as well. And Smith is just so good. It's been a bit of a reminder almost that, Australia haven't needed Steve Smith across the first 4 tests hardly. I mean, he obviously missed Adelaide, but has had a few cameos. I think it took him till sort of midway through today to overtake Jamie as the leading scoring Smith in the series. And yet it just felt like an absolute cruise. I think as soon as he started doing all his mannerisms, it felt pretty ominous. And when he was calling wides before umpires by the end of the day, I think any England fans who had intended to stay up through the night and didn't have to contractually for work reasons had probably long since turned off.
Yeah, I think it was the first time the Wisden Discord was completely inactive. At about 4:30 this morning, it was pretty bleak. At 1:30, I think someone in Australia said, "Why is anyone not in Australia not being paid to watching this?" And I think that was a fair question. I think it's a really good point on Steve Smith in that you've got the guy who many people certainly regard as the best to do it since Bradman, barely been required this series. You think about it as a poor test at Perth. Then in the day-nighter, he scores 61 in the first innings and he's out via that blinder by Will Jacks that just about gives England a chance in that game. He's not out in the 2 run chases in the first 2 test matches, misses the 3rd test on a good pitch, then is only out once on the Melbourne Snake Pit. So he hasn't really been required. England haven't actually got him out that many times this series, despite him barely having done anything by the time the 5th test comes about. And I thought Australia, I guess what the sense of this series being a missed opportunity for England was in part because of how short Australia have been from their best. Cummins, Hazelwood and Lyon have played 3 tests between them this series. Several of their top 7 are under fire, even though they will almost certainly win the series 4-1. And I think there have been 2 passages of play where Australia have been close to their best this series. One was day 2 with the ball at Adelaide when Cummins and Lyon were exceptional. And then today with the bat, I thought, as poor as England were, and we will get onto them, don't worry, Australia were excellent. And it wasn't just Head and Smith, it was just the way they managed the day. So going from the top, Nisa, the night watchman, sure, he rode his luck a little bit, but he lost 90 deliveries, 15 overs into the legs of the England seamers through most of that first session, which has been the trickiest part of the day all game to bat in. He also gets England to burn 2 reviews on him. And then even that Smith-Kawaja partnership after Bethel gets Head before the second new ball, it was just no nonsense, no frills, no thrills test batting. Just get to the second new ball, block England's route back into the game, because there were times where it felt really strange today. Even though it felt Australia were dominant, you looked at the score and thought, oh, hang on, Australia were basically in the same position that England were, but Australia just managed their position in the game so much better than England did. You know, not to bring it up again, but I spent a lot of today thinking about that Jamie Smith shot yesterday and just thinking like how unimaginable it would be for an Australian to play something similar in the same circumstances.
Yeah, I mean, there have been a few moments through the series where Australia players have done random things at weird times, like thinking back to Cam Green's dismissal at the Gabba when he was sort of, I can't remember how many runs he took off Carter's first over of that spell of bouncers, maybe 16 or 17, and then suddenly yorked himself, and you thought, wow, okay, England suddenly have an opportunity out of nowhere, and have through the series have been quite good at sort of letting England back in without England having to do that much right, whereas today felt like, as you say, the opposite. I was going to make exactly the same point, really, about Smith's shot, which I know has been covered to death. But I suppose the contrast between Stokes running in for, I think, a 7-over spell with the old ball immediately before the second new one was due, and having to really flog himself, just get dead batted, worked away for ones, all that sort of thing. Just very dull, dour, pragmatic cricket from Australia's, numbers. Well, I suppose 5 and 6 in this game, given the night watchman's been used, compared to a pretty shoddy effort, a pretty shoddy attempt at being an enforcer from a part-time leg spinner, ending up in the hands of deep cover. It does just feel like it tells the story of it, and in some ways, England fans might not like me saying this because it sounds almost sadistic, but I'm almost pleased that England aren't going to get away with a 3-2. We were pretty close type result. I think that would probably not quite be a fair reflection of just how dominant, or how much they were outplayed across those first 3 tests. As it is, looking likely to be 4-1, and the one being a pretty big asterisk next to it, given the nature of that game at the MCG. I think that feels like a more fair reflection as to how big the gulf has been between the teams, despite the fact that Australia have had all of the absentees, or Ben put it very nicely in his tweet yesterday, talking about all of the things that sort of seem like they would be things that would indicate an England win if you'd said them before the series, and yet it just feels like Australia have outclassed England throughout, and proved it today.
Yeah, I think despite me staying up all night again, whilst it's -5 degrees outside, I think I have a slightly less sadistic view than you. I think for me, it was, regardless of how England played it, I think it was really good and important that we saw Australia have a really good couple of days. I think that however England responded to Australia being really good would have been interesting. I think even if England had won this test match with Australia putting in a more professional performance, I think that would have meant a lot. And I think the nature of what a 3-2 could have been different depending on how they managed it. Australia was so professional today. Smith, he envisaged how he was scoring that 100 from the second he came in. He knew what he was doing. He knew that if he's there with 2 hours to go in the day, the last 2 hours, it's going to be easy. You're going to face tired bowlers at the end of a very long tour and part-time spinners. And he was rewarded in getting to three figures. He now has the second most Ashes runs and the second most Ashes hundreds, 13, and head. It's a third hundred of the series for him. In the history of Ashes cricket, only Bradman, Smith, Stackpole, Slater, and Greg Chappell have scored more than the runs Head has scored this series in a home series for Australia. How do you think England bowled today?
Not very well, and I would conflate yesterday in that as well. I think they've been really poor throughout this bowling innings. I do think we have to, mention prominently the fact that they're without Atkinson, Archer, and Wood through injury. You can obviously make I think, quite valid point that there was always a good chance that by the end of the series, England would have a couple of seam injuries, looking at the sort of, I suppose, fitness records of their quicks across their careers. But, clearly all of England's first choice planning is out of the window by this stage of the series. So I think that is an important consideration. That said, I think we'll look back, and I'm thinking it even now, so it's not just going to be a hindsight thing, but it does seem extraordinary that Bryden Carse has opened the bowling in three consecutive Ashes Test matches, despite despite all the evidence of his new ball spells across this series, which have consistently been very, very poor. I think Carter's he's had a truly bizarre series as far as I'm concerned. I was looking back through the numbers of England, sort of most prolific wickets by an England bowler in an Ashes series in Australia since 1980. Only Jimmy Anderson in 10-11 has taken more wickets in a series in all that context than Carter's 22 in this. So he has, as everyone always says he would, run in all day and found a way to get players out and to break partnerships. So I actually think with the old ball at times in this series, he's been very good. The problem is he's clearly not a new ball bowler, and yet England have persisted constantly for the last three tests with giving him the new ball, and it obviously hasn't worked. I was sort of tearing my hair out in those 10 overs before the second new ball was due, watching Stokes and thinking, well, I don't really see at this point how he can possibly be bowling now and then take the second new ball, and just it felt inevitable that he wasn't going to do it, and I don't quite understand Stokes' sort of stubbornness and his reluctance to do it when he's quite clearly been England's best bowler in the series. At least just to try it, just to do something a bit differently. He was talking before this test about sort of the importance of having defined roles and all that sort of thing, but he's changed the role of Carse midway through the series from change bowler where he's been successful to opening bowler where he's not been at all successful. So I don't really understand why there's such a reluctance to have a go at that. Even Josh Tongue not taking the new ball feels sort of needlessly stubborn. When you have a position where England effectively have four guys who, Potts, you could make the case could be an opening bowler, but has also been a change bowler plenty in his career. You almost have four change bowlers there. Why not mix it around a little bit in terms of who you're giving the new ball to, especially when you're in a position where Australia are 360 for four or something like that, when England actually had the opportunity with the new ball. So yeah, it does feel weirdly stubborn and weirdly sort of, I don't know. There was a point where Stokes as a captain was doing genuinely quite interesting things. If you think back to the first summer in the job, it was all, there was obviously a lot of overexcitement about everything that England were doing, but Stuart Broad and James Anderson had never bowled fields like they had, like the ones that England used in 2022. You think back to the 2022 tour of Pakistan, England did all sorts of crazy stuff in terms of, mad reverse swing fields. They bowled bumpers with the new ball to try and get it reversing as soon as possible. They did all sorts of innovative, exciting things. And now they are basically back to old school test cricket of we either try and get it, bowl for a nick off, or we're going to bang it in halfway down, or we're going to bowl some part-time spin. And it's pretty ugly, really. I do also, I appreciate that Australia haven't played a spinner through this series, so it's a slightly maybe it's a little harsh to query it too much, but it does seem very, very odd to me that you've got a situation where Will Jacks, who is effectively playing as England's, number 8 bowling all-rounder and spinner, is bowling 4 out of the first, 117 overs, I think, and has gone from bowling 39 overs in the test match on a turning pitch in Adelaide to being second choice part-time spinner behind Jacob Bethel. It beggars belief, really, and I think underlines just how wrong all of the planning has gone that we've reached this stage.
Yeah, I've some sympathy with Stokes' captaincy. I think that when you're describing the interesting things he did in 22 and 23, you reeled off a list of bowlers who are vastly more skillful than the ones that he's got at his disposal here. So
Agreed.
I think about, if you go back to the very beginning of today, Tongue and Stokes don't take the new ball, but they start, and they actually start okay. They don't get an early breakthrough,
Yeah.
but Australia aren't going that quickly. And then Potts and Cast come on, and the runs really, really start to flow. And there was a period where Potts was bowling to head, and Potts you actually made a really good comparison with Potts today over WhatsApp. You compared it to when Sonny Baker was bowling to Aidan Markram in his ODI debut at Headingley
Yeah,
towards the
Headingley.
end of the
Yeah.
summer, where Baker didn't bowl horrendously, but his figures were not pretty. Basically, because against a player that good, your margin for error is really small, and that's what it was with Potts. Potts did not bowl like awfully, awfully. His figures are really poor. None for 141. He's on the cusp of breaking all sorts of records for worst figures for an Englishman, for anyone really in a Test match. But the issue was he was bowling balls that were just a little bit wide, and he was getting punished. They weren't really, really wide. It was just to a player like Travis Head, he wasn't bowling accurately enough. And Stokes starts by giving Potts quite a normal field. And then by the end of the over, he's got 3 men out on the offside boundary. One slip, having started with 3 in a gully. Like, he's doing this to protect the bowlers. I read the period before the second new ball slightly differently. I thought that was Stokes doing something he's done before, which is attempt to put the game on hold when it's difficult to take wickets. And he is the only guy in this England attack who can really keep the game on hold. Josh Tongue's been exciting, but he's not really that type of bowler. So he bowls 7 overs in a row. Australia don't really get away from England. By the time the second new ball comes, they're 320 odd for 4, which is not far off where England were at exactly the same stage in their innings. The issue is, then it's Potts and Cast who come on with a new ball, and they go at 6s straight away, and then the game is completely out of England's hands. I just think he's very, very limited with the options that he has. But then it comes to the next question, which is, well, who else could they have picked? I don't know. I don't know. We've talked about this earlier in the series. Who is out there that is a better option? It's not as if there's a long list of guys who bowl faster than, let's be honest, 78 miles per hour, let alone 82, 83 in the county game. You look at Lions tours, they're identifying guys and attributes. These are young guys who've barely played any professional cricket. They're not any better than the guys they picked here. So I think this is one failure, this tour, that I don't think we can really blame the management for.
It's what I would say on that briefly is I feel like Potts is just in such a bizarre situation where it's almost accepted and known that the management don't really rate him and haven't for a bit of time. So I think I'm right in saying of his last 8 tests, he's played 7 different opponents. And it's obviously been a year gap since his last one in New Zealand, where he didn't do hugely well, but was then on the back burner for the summer. Sam Cooke was picked ahead of him for the Zimbabwe test and didn't do particularly well. Then Jamie Overton was picked ahead of him throughout that India series in squads, and then ultimately in the 5th test at the Oval. He wouldn't have been here but for Overton's Red Bull retirement, or Red Bull, putting his career on hold effectively. So it does seem like Potts is almost the backup man, and there's almost a sense of, I'd never really liked the idea of players being set up to fail, because I don't think it ever is that. But it has almost, there was a moment, particularly when Jamie Smith came up to the stumps today, where I almost felt like, I don't think they were doing this for a second, but it almost felt like England proving their point that, Dobbers with the keeper up as Rob Key put it, doesn't work at this level. I almost wish that they doubled down and had someone like Mitch Stanley debuting. He might have had exactly the same terrible figures, but at least they might have learned something. Whereas it feels like Potts is almost there just as an option of last resort and the sort of default, because there is no one else. I mean, I think the one that I'm sort of reluctant to go back to too much, because of the fact that clearly, he did break down in his last 2 tests, and clearly England had a sense from a management perspective that he wasn't someone they wanted around their squad. But there is a guy who very recently was playing grade cricket in this city, Ollie Robinson. He has a test average of 22 and a half, 23. And for all that I do understand that, stuff goes on behind the scenes, and maybe he wasn't the perfect character, and maybe he wasn't the guy that England felt they could trust. He had a pretty solid season for Sussex in the Championship. Was he really not, vaguely capable of being a last minute call up in circumstances where someone like Overton effectively pulls out of the tour at a couple of weeks' notice. I don't know. Maybe not. Maybe it's entirely valid that he's not here. But given everything we know about England and how sort of stubborn they've been in drawing a line through players, maybe, who knows? Maybe he could have made a difference. But yeah, I think the more general point is probably that, I think we've spoken about this a fair bit in the series, but for all the excitement around the group of quicks that England have attempted to put together, and all of the prioritizing of attributes and all that sort of thing, and looking at high ceilings, they have lost a hell of a lot of wickets since the 23 home Ashes. If you include Wood in that in particular, I think it's about 1,800 wickets that they've lost between Anderson, Broad, Wokes, Wood, Moeen Ali. They were always going to be up against it with the ball here, and I think that we've really seen that throughout this day and a bit of bowling. It just feels like all of those absentees, Rowan Archer and Atkinson as well, have left this side extremely exposed, and this is the result of it.
Yeah, chuck in Robinson and Leach and you get to 2,000. And the other thing is that they're not taking all the chances that they create. So England have now dropped 17 catches this series to follow on from the 18 that they dropped against India in the summer. They're basically averaging 3.5 drops per test match at the moment. And sure, some of those are really difficult, but you look at them today. Heads dropped on 121 by Jacks. That was a very straightforward chance. Zach Crawley dropped a difficult chance low to his left at leg slip off Steve Smith when Smith hadn't even reached 20 yet. Graham Swan was adamant on commentary that very difficult, but also one that Crawley would probably expect himself to take, and I think the other two were harder. But yeah, I mean, just one line from Justin Lang on the TNT coverage I'd like to share. When discussing the importance of catching, he said, when describing the work that Marnus Labuschagne has done in the field for Australia this series, he said, great catches don't just boost your team's morale, they boost the nation's morale. Which is brilliant. I'm not entirely sure if Zach Crawley had clung on to that catch at leg slip, the nation of Great Britain and Northern Ireland would feel any better this morning.
Yeah, well, I would just say on that quickly as well is that Stokes specifically was asked about, should you have had a fielding coach effectively? Why haven't you brought a fielding coach on this tour? And said, yeah, it's something we'll obviously address after this series. And I don't necessarily think it matters who's hitting the balls in practice, but when Australia have a designated fielding coach, and it feels like they're taking every half chance that comes their way, they obviously haven't. They've obviously dropped a few over the course of the series as well. But it's just such an easy stick to beat England with. And I think at this point in the series, it just feels like it sort of epitomises the sloppiness that they've managed to get through this series, and suddenly admitted at the end, oh yeah, maybe a fielding coach would have been quite a good idea in the series where we've shelled an absolute ton of chances.
Thanks to RIVERSTONE for supporting the Ashes Daily, luxury London living that keeps you independent, inspired and connected. If you don't feel like slowing down but enjoying more of life, head to riverstoneliving.com and get in touch with them for a tour today. That's it for today's show. If you want more from Matt, head to the after show on the Wisden Patreon.